Counselor Velix jerked awake at the urgent words. Counselor, wake up. The Terrans have breached containment. Velix sat bolt upright to find his aide Milo standing at the foot of his bed. The small, round-bodied assistant looked uncharacteristically anxious. Milo's single large eye, which dominated the upper portion of his spherical form, was wide with concern as he fidgeted with the edge of his official vestment. What do you mean, breached containment? Velix asked, disbelief evident in his voice. I know nothing beyond that, Counselor. An emergency assembly of the Council has been called by the Sovereign personally. I am to escort you to the Grand Observatory without delay. Milo replied, his voice trembling slightly. Very well. Wait outside while I dress, Velix commanded. The small aide bowed his head and scurried out, pulling the privacy screen closed behind him. After his aide departed, Velix swung his 6 limbs over the edge of his resting platform. He stretched his torso and upper appendages toward the ceiling, the small ridges that circled his head pressing against his skin as he did so. His azure hide was far too thick for them to cause even the slightest discomfort. Feeling somewhat more alert after his abrupt awakening, he rose and began to dress. He donned the flowing emerald robes that identified him as a council member and fastened a golden band around his upper limb bearing his ancestral insignia. He was a Kalordi, after all, and to his species, lineage meant everything. Milo was waiting in the corridor, nervously tapping the floor with one of his 3-toed feet. The diminutive aide turned and led the way through Velix's lavish estate. They passed numerous ornate chambers, a gathering space furnished with intricate woven seating arranged around a central heating element, the archive his forebear had assembled from among the settled systems, a collection hall his relative had filled with rarities from exotic expeditions, and an equipment repository housing devices from an earlier era when conflict still existed, a darker time during which his family had manufactured many of the implements employed. As they emerged outside, Velix tilted his head upward to observe the sky, still the deep teal and amber of a Kalori night. What hour is it, Milo? He inquired. Middle of night cycle, sir. I'm certain none of the council members are pleased about being summoned at this hour. Mind your step, sir, the aide replied, holding open the door to the hover vessel he had waiting. By the ancestors, what could possibly warrant this from the Sovereign? Velix muttered, climbing into the vessel and taking the passenger position. Haven't the faintest idea, my lord, but we'd best hurry. It must be tremendously important, Milo said, rushing around the craft to jump into the pilot's seat. He activated the propulsion system. The atmospheric engines thrummed to life, and the sleek, copper-colored vehicle ascended into the night. The journey over his lands typically brought Velix pleasure, but tonight an ominous feeling seemed to permeate everything. He hoped this was merely his own apprehension rather than a harbinger of trouble ahead. Choosing to dismiss such thoughts, he directed his gaze forward to see the great archways looming in the distance. The archways had been constructed ages ago, at a time when his species had just marked centuries without conflict and generations, since they had harnessed the fundamental energy particle, providing them unlimited power. That was when the guides of the Sovereign's court had initiated contact with them through mental communication. They had provided instructions on how to construct and energize these magnificent archways, which enabled travel between worlds. This was how every member species of the Dominion had achieved interstellar travel. So universally accepted was this pattern that it had become law. Species must achieve these milestones in this precise sequence and maintain them for specified durations before they could be considered for membership. The Terrans had accomplished none of these prerequisites. They hadn't even established peace among themselves. So what could they possibly have done to warrant this assembly? Velix's contemplation was interrupted as the hover vessel descended between the twin archways. He knew one archway led to the hub, an enormous facility that housed portals to every member species' homeworld, as well as portals awaiting future connections. He had rarely used it, only once when he had visited another world as part of the diplomatic training required for council service. The portal they were approaching, however, he used regularly. It led directly to the seat of the Dominion, the homeland of the psychically gifted guide species and meeting place of the Galactic Council. Milo leaped from his seat and hurried around the vessel to open Valex's door with a slight bow. Velex smiled. He didn't believe in servitude, but those who volunteered for it often approached their duties with utmost dedication. Milo's commitment to even these small courtesies eased the counselor's troubled mind. "Well, we shouldn't keep anyone waiting, my faithful aide," he said, exiting the vehicle and striding toward the portal. Milo sealed the door and shuffled after him, keeping pace well despite the size difference between them. When they reached the threshold, they paused together and waited. "Are you prepared?" A whisper-thin voice resonated in their minds. "We are," Valex replied aloud. A luminescent appendage with multiple digits extended through the portal toward him. Another reached toward Milo. In unison, the appendages grasped them by the shoulders and pulled them through. Valex felt his consciousness separating from his physical form, felt the boundaries of his body dissolve, felt the web of thought he had become enveloped in a cocoon of mental energy from their guide escort. He tried to ignore the unsettling reality of the archways, but once the thought arose, it was impossible to dismiss. Traveling between worlds wasn't truly traveling in the conventional sense. The archways were not matter transporters after all. These archways functioned as amplifiers for psychic signals, allowing a guide to mentally reach across infinite distances. They would use their abilities to extract your consciousness from your physical form and memorize the composition of your body down to the most fundamental particle. Your body was then deconstructed on one side and reconstructed on the other before your consciousness was reintegrated. Traveling without a guide would result only in oblivion. This mechanism maintained order, how the Dominion preserved its authority, cooperate or be isolated and stranded. But it functioned effectively, and the Dominion had been benevolent to all its members, with benefits distributed equitably. Velex felt his thoughts decelerate now, which indicated the journey was nearly complete, and then he felt them halt abruptly for the briefest moment before a gentle current of air touched his face. They had arrived, and he was once again embodied. Valex opened his eyes and bowed to the guide who had facilitated their passage. Milo did likewise, though much more deeply. The guide was somewhat shorter than Valex and considerably more slender. He possessed multiple iridescent eyes arranged in a pattern across his angular face. His elongated limbs now hung at his sides, and he was breathing heavily, slightly hunched on his unusual legs. His shimmering skin glistened with perspiration, giving him an almost fluid appearance. Clearly, he had been working intensely, bringing council members through the archway one after another, a considerable exertion. The other guides nearby appeared similarly taxed, with a fresh team standing ready to take over should their fatigue become too severe for safely transporting minds across the void. Velex straightened from his bow and said, "We thank you for your effort. Mindbearer, are we among the last to arrive?" "Not even close. We still have many council members to bring through. Don't concern yourself with us. We've trained extensively for this," his voice whispered in Valex's mind, still breathless from the exertion. "Be sure not to overextend yourself, and remember to rest and nourish yourself afterward." "Thank you again, Mindbearer," Valex said, turning to walk down the massive corridor to the council chambers. This hallway was grand and opulent, as were all structures on the Dominion's foundation, the capital world. It was lined with effigies of each member race's first council representative, appearing in the order they had joined. Those closer to the council hall represented earlier members, while those nearer the portal represented more recent additions. Space remained in the corridor for future species should any qualify for membership. Midway along the row of statues on the right side, Valex paused as he always did. He gazed upward at the visage of his ancestor, Counselor Thorn. It had been Thorn who had received a guide's message, who had overseen the archway's construction, and who had helped their species become a respected member of the council. Milo reached into his vestment and withdrew a fragrant stick made from flora native to Calora, as well as a small ignition device. He held both out to Valex, who accepted them. Valex placed the fragrant stick in a small receptacle at the base of the statue. He held the ignition device to the upper end of the stick and squeezed it gently. A soft flash and spark emerged between his digits, and a delicate tendril of smoke rose upward. Valex stepped back and bowed profoundly, his head ridges nearly touching the floor. Still maintaining his reverential posture, he solemnly intoned, "Guide me, Ancestor Thorn, for tonight your wisdom may well be needed. For our honor and for yours, I shall uphold our principles. May I deserve the esteem you earned." Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, and proceeded toward the council hall. As he walked, he observed many others performing similar rituals. It was customary throughout the Dominion, and so the vast corridor was filled with the mingled scents of countless different flora from countless different worlds, a sensory experience possible nowhere else in existence, and truly magnificent. Valex and Milo arrived at the council hall as quickly as Milo's short legs could carry him. Valex could have easily outpaced him, but that would have been improper and discourteous for a council member. Besides, Valex enjoyed the little aide's company. Together, they entered the main chamber. It consisted of concentric circular tables, all centered around a raised platform. The tables progressively increased in size to encompass the previous one. Many council members had already taken their positions, seated at their planet's designated location. Valex and Milo found their place at a table approximately midway from the central platform. Like the statues in the entrance corridor, the seating arrangement was determined by the chronological order in which species had joined the Dominion. As they took their seats, more and more council members and their aides continued to arrive. It occurred to Valex that the Sovereign might have summoned literally every council member. If so, it would be the first time in Valex's lifetime such a full assembly had been called. The realization unsettled him. This situation was far more serious than he had initially presumed. He and Milo waited patiently for the others to locate and occupy their positions. They exchanged tense acknowledgments with several other representatives nearby as they arrived. Everyone seemed disturbed by the summons and its implications. The Terrans have breached containment. Valex recalled Milo's words. What could this possibly mean? It seemed impossible, yet Valex knew he would soon discover the truth. A resonant, deep tone echoed through the chamber, silencing everyone. Valex looked up to see an enormous ceremonial instrument suspended at the chamber's far end. Two guide attendants were striking it with ceremonial implements. Another tone sounded. A moment of silence followed, and then a third tone reverberated through the room. The guide attendants pivoted and stood rigidly with their implements raised beside them. Then Valex saw him. The guide sovereign entered from behind the ceremonial instrument, and with swift, graceful movements, ascended the platform at the center of the room. He turned and surveyed the assembled council before speaking. Council members, I have called this assembly to address grave developments. Some of you are familiar with this matter. Others may have no knowledge of it whatsoever. Allow me to speak and bring us all to the same understanding so we may determine our course of action. I called this assembly to discuss a species we have been observing. They call themselves the Terrans. They call their planet Earth and their star system Sol. Their system lies at the periphery of our territory. The Sovereign paused to allow the implications to resonate. Valex was familiar. The Dominion had been monitoring these primates, gathering information about them through psychic observation. They had shown potential as candidates for joining the Dominion, but they had yet to establish peace among themselves. We thought perhaps one day these Terrans might join us, the Sovereign continued evenly. He paused, then added in a near whisper, but they have violated evolutionary law. Shocked silence permeated the chamber, as if everyone's breath had been suddenly withdrawn by that single assertion. What do you mean, violated evolutionary law, my Sovereign? A council member called out. A good and reasonable question. We understand evolutionary law states that a species will first master themselves, establishing peace. Then they shall master the fundamental particle, securing energy. Finally, they shall follow the guides in constructing their archways, mastering distance, and achieving unity. It is called law not because we enforce it, but because it has always been thus. It is law in the same way gravity is. It simply exists. The Terrans have followed a different path. An uproar nearly erupted, a multitude of questions cascading forth. One in particular resonated from countless voices. How? The Sovereign allowed the shocked inquiry to permeate the chamber briefly, then silently raised one shimmering hand. The chamber instantly quieted. We have been observing them, gathering information from their minds when possible. Just recently, we learned horrifying truths about them. The Terrans have had another conflict among themselves, motivated solely by their contempt for each other's appearances and beliefs. This one engulfed their entire planet. Not a region of their world remains untouched by this hostility. We have learned that during this conflict, they mastered the fundamental particle and weaponized it against each other. He paused, allowing his last statement to hang in the air before continuing. That's correct. Rather than transforming this magnificent scientific achievement into unlimited sustainable energy, they chose to unleash its power upon each other. They deployed an explosive device armed with the fundamental particle on not one but two of their population centers. They did not target each other's military forces, but instead their civilian inhabitants. These Terrans are fixated on conflict. They have taken it to unprecedented levels among sentient species. It bears noting that due to the distance to the Terran world, even with our most powerful guide directing the observation, there remains a significant delay in the information received. They are working presently to reduce this delay so that we may better monitor this emerging threat. And make no mistake, these Terrans represent a threat to us, if this is what they willingly inflict upon each other, upon their own kind. He paused again, and an image materialized in the air above him. An image of an enormous cloud, broad at the summit while narrower in the middle and at the base. He then concluded quietly, I dread to consider what they might do to us, should they discover our existence. The chamber remained silent. Everyone stared at the projection in collective horror. None had ever imagined a species could harbor such appetite for conflict and destruction that they would unleash this, let alone upon their own world and species. Velek struggled to maintain his composure. A counselor at the back of the room stood and calmly asked, My lord, might we have additional information about these Terrans, their history and behavioral patterns? Perhaps we should review what we know so we may act based on reason rather than fear, especially considering the delay in the information we receive. The Sovereign turned and replied, Certainly. There is another factor at play here as well. I have one of our leading researchers present to brief you all. He then descended from the platform and went to his position, situated closest to the platform, signifying his planet's status as founders of the Dominion. One of the guide research specialists approached and ascended the platform. Greetings, honorable council members, they said with a bow. We have what we believe to be an accurate account of Terran history up to the news the Sovereign has shared. They are by far the youngest species we have encountered, the youngest ever to have mastered the fundamental particle. Their species, by their own reckoning, evolved only recently in cosmic terms. The council erupted once more, everyone shocked. No species had advanced their sciences sufficiently in such a brief span to be able to manipulate, let alone detect, the fundamental particles. How is this possible? Was the predominant question raised by anxious voices throughout the chamber. The Sovereign rose and declared, I demand order. We shall conduct these proceedings with decorum, or we shall not conduct them at all. The room immediately fell silent. The implicit threat of adjourning the session loomed ominously. Could it mean the Sovereign considered this serious enough to declare hostilities? Valex wondered privately. The guide researcher cleared their throat and continued, Yes, they have advanced that rapidly. From what we can determine, their growth and accelerated scientific development has been driven by a single motivating factor: conflict. Repeatedly throughout their history, they have followed one cycle. Advancement leads to prosperity. Prosperity leads to competition. Competition leads to conflict, and conflict leads to advancement. From their most primitive era, They have maintained this pattern. It is a cycle they have never broken. You ask what pattern we should learn from regarding the Terrans. That is it. Now, regarding the other issue our sovereign mentioned. The Terrans have achieved space travel. They have constructed massive combustion rockets that they strap themselves into and ride into the cosmic void. This, too, is unprecedented. They have landed on their planetary satellite and successfully returned to their world. They have escaped the natural containment of their planet. The room was deathly quiet now. To learn that a species had advanced itself so rapidly by destroying each other was a horrifying concept. Evolution and advancement were meant to be fueled by peace and collaborative knowledge sharing. The thought that these Terrans had once been candidates for the Dominion chilled Valix to his core. He stood and proclaimed, "We cannot permit them to join us. We cannot grant them access to Archway technology. They must remain confined to their own system." Shouts of agreement filled the room. Valix resumed his seat and felt a gentle tug on his robe hem. Milo was there, offering a cloth. He leaned close to Valix and whispered, "My lord, your brow." Valix realized the revelations about the Terrans and the image still hovering in the air had caused him to perspire from anxiety. He accepted the cloth and wiped his face. As he finished, he saw the sovereign stand and return to the platform. He stood beside the researcher and surveyed the chamber. "I observe that the same apprehension which grips me now has affected all of you as well. This is appropriate and reasonable given what we know. But Counselor Valix is correct. As long as no one shares Archway technology with the Terrans, as long as the Terrans never discover our existence, we should remain secure. Let them wage war among themselves. Perhaps in time they will learn peace, or perhaps they will annihilate themselves in the fires of conflict, or perhaps they will continue to master the cosmic void and eventually reach us." He paused and shook his head, his shoulders slumping. The guide researcher gently placed a hand on the sovereign's shoulder, then stepped down and departed. The sovereign sighed and said, "However, I do not wish to remain passive. The possibility of this threat is too significant. Some form of action must be taken. I propose new directives regarding the Terrans. First, communication with the Terrans without the expressed consent of the entire sitting council shall be prohibited. Second, observation of the Terrans unless authorized and directly overseen by the council, sovereign, and scientific leadership shall be prohibited. Third, establishing new member species that may be discovered within a vast distance of the Terran system shall be prohibited." Many council members began loudly objecting to the final declaration, their voices overlapping. Valix was not among them. He understood the sovereign's reasoning. If they established new members too near the Terrans, they risked discovery. If the Terrans learned of their existence, or worse, of the Archways, by observing a new member species constructing theirs, it could spell catastrophe for everyone. As matters stood currently, Archway travel was impossible without assistance from the guides, but the Terrans' rate of advancement suggested they might alter that reality. It involved many contingencies, but the Terrans were terrifying. Those contingencies might be the Dominion's only safeguards, especially considering that the Terrans were launching rockets into the void. The Sovereign allowed the council members to voice their objections before addressing them collectively. "I understand this restricts and potentially disadvantages members yet to be discovered. However, these Terrans pose far too great a threat. We cannot take such risks. We must look elsewhere for new species to join us. These directives will be voted upon, and if they are not approved, I shall honor that decision. We determine our fate together. That is the fundamental principle of this Dominion." As he concluded, small interface panels emerged from the tables before each council member. It was time to vote on these proposed measures. Valix voted in favor of all three provisions, confirmed each selection, and then awaited the rest of the council's decisions. He observed the chamber and noticed many council members conferring quietly with their aides. The small assistants always proved valuable in moments like this. They had a way of helping clarify complex thoughts simply by discussing them. This was why their species had elected to serve in this capacity rather than holding council seats themselves. It appeared this vote was not as straightforward for the other council members as it had been for Velex. This made sense. After all, his species was among the few that still preserved records of their conflicts. He was among the few whose families had risen to prominence through it. He was among the few who still felt remorse for the actions of certain ancestors. He would do anything to restore their honor, even if it meant denying some new species membership. Eventually, every council member had voted. When the votes had been tallied and verified, the sovereign rose and returned to the platform. Once again, he slowly turned to ensure he acknowledged every council member before announcing. The vote stands as follows. The first and second proposed directives have been approved and take effect immediately. There will be zero tolerance for violations, with strict enforcement. The third directive was approved provisionally by a narrow margin. It shall only be implemented should a state of emergency or conflict be declared by the sitting sovereign. May the stars forbid we ever reach such circumstances. The sovereign turned and looked in Valex's direction, saying, I now request volunteers. I wish to establish a special task committee to develop contingency plans. Who among you would participate? I ask to be included in the proceedings, yet I believe it would be most effective if led by one familiar with conflict. Councillor Velex, I ask you to assume leadership in this matter. I know you share my commitment to preserving peace throughout the Dominion. Will you undertake this responsibility for me? Velex was astonished. He had never before been singled out by the sovereign, nor had he realized the sovereign understood his motivations so well. He glanced at Milo, who nodded once. Velex stood and addressed the chamber. You honor my ancestors and myself. I accept this responsibility. Who will join me, so that should the worst occur, we may be prepared to safeguard peace? The chamber was still and silent. For a moment, Velex thought none would volunteer. Then a council member rose from his position, a large translucent mass, as all of his species were. Shortly after, a small winged council member from another world also rose. These were representatives of other species that had documented their conflicts. Velex nodded approvingly. These were ideal council members for the task. They understood the necessity of avoiding confrontation with the Terrans just as well as he did. We shall fulfill this duty, my sovereign, Velex said with a bow. Those who had volunteered bowed as well. I could not have asked for more. Thank you, council members, for your time today. If there are no other urgent matters requiring discussion, the session is concluded. Those of you on this new committee, please remain so we may discuss your responsibilities further. My sovereign, urgent news. A guide burst into the chamber, interrupting the sovereign. What is it? The sovereign asked sharply. We have made a grave error. The information we had previously was significantly outdated, as you know. We had been investigating methods to obtain more current information. We attempted one approach that seemed promising. We used what the Terrans call radio waves to amplify our own psychic signals. We intercepted broadcasts from the Terrans' recent past, the most current we've been able to access yet. The guide paused, appearing nervous. The sovereign demanded, continue. The Terrans detected us. They know of our existence now, the guide said quietly. What was the Terran response? How much do they know? Will they bring conflict to us? The sovereign fired off the questions with authority. We do not know, sir. As soon as we learned they had detected us, we terminated all signals, the guide replied, shrinking back. Velex knew the sovereign would not harm the guide. He was too compassionate to punish the messenger, but he still empathized with the guide's predicament in delivering such grave news. Velex felt his legs weaken, and he collapsed into his seat, stunned. The Terrans who had unleashed the power of existence upon each other, who had constructed and ridden explosive rockets into the cosmic void, the Terrans who had broken every pattern except that of conflict, they knew about the Dominion. Velex felt his earlier anxiety intensify considerably. He wiped his brow with the cloth Milo had provided earlier. The weight of his new responsibility leading the task committee doubled. He felt the burden of it, and the fear of the Terrans overwhelming him. Milo placed a reassuring hand on his arm, and Valex felt his resolve strengthen, as long as his faithful aide remained by his side. Helping shoulder the burden, he knew he could manage. The rest of the chamber erupted in open fear and panic. Many council members from species whose homeworlds were closer to the Terran system were the most vocal in their alarm. The Sovereign again raised a hand, quieting them. I understand your fears. They mirror my own. I propose we begin relocation efforts in advance for those who wish it. We cannot abandon our people to this risk. This calmed much of the panic. Valex stood and gazed across his fellow council members and toward the Sovereign. The Sovereign gestured for him to approach and stand beside him. Apprehension gripped Valex as he walked to the platform. Was he truly going to commit the same transgressions as his ancestors? Could he bring himself to once again activate the forges and begin manufacturing the instruments of war? And then he stood on the platform beside the Sovereign. My colleagues and Sovereign, I believe we must confront a difficult truth. Never before have we faced a threat from the stars like this. We have overcome many great challenges together in the past. I see no reason this will be any different. We must pursue peace where possible, yet we must also prepare for the aggression they demonstrate. We must collaborate, utilizing the unique strengths of every member species to construct defenses against these Terran rockets. They may traverse the cosmic void to find us. This is a possibility we cannot disregard. But if they do, they will find us prepared and waiting. If the Terrans' appetite for conflict should reach us, we will not be found unprepared.